Hello, welcome to my presentation for the 2022 Early Childhood Voices Conference, hosted by Sturt University, Australia. My name is Andi Salamon, and I am presenting a project about infants' cognitive, social, and emotional actions, interactions, and communication that I call emotional capital practices. And before I begin, I'd like to pay my respects to all First Nations elders, past, present, and emerging, from the lands where Charles Sturt students reside. In particular, we acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundungurra, and Biripi peoples of Australia, who are the traditional custodians of the land where Charles Sturt campuses are located. As members of the Charles Sturt community, we acknowledge the words of the Wiradjuri people, on whose land our university was founded, and share their aspiration for India Mara Winangana, the aim for us all to learn the wisdom of respectfully living well in a world worth living in. This presentation unpacks part of the concept of emotional capital practices in infant pedagogy to help adults better understand very young children's use of sophisticated, social, and evocative emotional communication, and then use these understandings to uphold infants' rights to quality early childhood education. I had noticed these sophisticated infant behaviours as an early childhood teacher and leader in the birth to two space, and then as a parent with a child who we'll come to see could be classed as a social clown, according to the literature, and that's him in the top picture. Putting on a face, that was him pretending to cry when he wanted something, and I had said no. And then in the middle picture, you see a similar face, but instead of the downturned aspect, it was more of an upturned, and as the outline says, screws up her face in an exaggerated smile. And so this had come out of my PhD. As I said, I had seen it in my practice and I'd seen it in my own child. And so in my doctorate, I created this notion, I thought I'd created this notion of emotional capital, drawing on Bourdieu's notion of symbolic capital, understanding that it was grounded in power. And I could see that these were very powerful expressions that the babies were using to draw people in or to relate with them in a particular way. And so the doctoral theorization of emotional capital was the springboard into this project, which was my early career research, and it was conducted with the support of the Jean Denton Memorial Scholarship. And because I've already presented parts of this project for last year's conference, my aim today is to discuss the other parts. So today I'll discuss the nitty-gritty of the developmental aspects that underpin emotional capital practices. And really that's the focus on infant cognition, physical and physiological development, and social, emotional, and language development. But to quickly share an overview of the project, the aim was to use my very good camera and document using visual and video digital footage. So I took my camera into an early childhood setting and I documented and then deconstructed these things that the babies were doing in their interactions with educators. Because the educators' responses or the adults' response is a part of this kind of contingent interaction that the babies are doing. If they're relating with us as adults, then our response is a part of that. So a second aim was to engage educators in deep and critical reflective practice about what they saw the babies doing, saying, and how they were relating, and also the way educators responded. Finally, I had planned on sharing and disseminating the findings of the research to the centre community, the local community, and the wider communities of early childhood education, pedagogy and practice. And I was able to do the first part of that and the last part of that. Unfortunately, due to COVID, I could not share wider in the local community. And so, to start with the cognitive and physical aspects of emotional capital practices. From before birth, humans process and regulate what they perceive through their senses in parts of the brain that are closely related to physical and biological systems. So you can think of that as the physiology. Haven't even gone into the nervous system. So that might be a whole other presentation. But at its core, the brainstem and the limbic area work together to help regulate our physical arousal, emotion, and ultimately attention. So infants' physiological and cognitive systems are thus inextricably linked, and understanding how is beneficial to any adult who aims to better support them and develop dispositions of curiosity, agency, and interest in their surroundings. And that's because when children are physically regulated, they feel safe in their bodies. And that's where the nervous system comes into play, because then they can begin to engage in key cognitive processes that promote learning and development. Infants learn by organising and focusing attention through repetition, through cause and effect, imitation, and acting with intention. So in the first 6 months, they realise they can direct and share attention with others. Sheila Degattardi tells us that sustained joint attention between educators and infants support both cognitive and language development. So what ends up happening is this co-regulation that occurs through sustained shared attention, and that ends up promoting self-regulation. So you can see it becomes something of a circular loop. Self-regulation then promotes cognitive development. So there's this nuanced interconnection between early self-regulation and cognitive development that is underpinned by co-regulation. So it's in the interactions, those serve and return interactions with key, capable and caring others, usually adults. And this is something that will keep coming up in each of the next slides. It's within those contingent relationships. So in looking at the social and emotional elements of early childhood practices, babies are born into social worlds, and they learn what they live through repeated action and interaction with the people and places around them. And so remember, when I say actions and interactions, that's what make up practices. At birth, babies are cognitively, physically, and socially vulnerable, but perhaps their most powerful early developmental capability is being able to cry. Babies use their cries as communication about physical needs first, and in ideal environments, these cries are met by caring adults who look sad maybe, or smile or console in culturally bound responses to infant expression. These are among the earliest serve and return interactions from which babies learn about other people and their emotional responses. So remembering that the holistic nature of infant development means babies' social and emotional development is not separate to the cognitive and physiological development that I showed in the previous slide. So it's hard to be able to show it all together. And as I said, I've broken it down here, but in the same way that they can direct adult attention to share objects, which we saw in the previous slide, by pointing, for example, infants can direct social attention. So in the same way they want to show something of the physical world, they also direct social adult attention to the things that they're doing and to themselves. And this is where Vasu Reddy refers to infant clowning. So she writes about clowning around and gives examples of infants' efforts to actively recruit people into emotional engagement by performing in exaggerated ways and repeating clever, funny, and odd actions that previously led to laughter. So they start to do these things on purpose, and they over-exaggerate. By 6 months, babies can repeat and over-exaggerate negative emotions that may also have previously recruited adults. So they can do this by over-exaggerating and at times faking their now sophisticated cries or smiles or laughs. And so that's where we come back to these things that the babies are doing. They're actively recruiting, they're purposely relating in a way that evokes a response from us. And so this embodied non-verbal language and evocative communication is at the heart of what we can now, at the heart of emotional capital practices, but we can think about them as infant social emotional practices. And all of that is underpinned by the cognitive. And so as outlined above, in terms of developing cognitive associations of cause and effect through those social serve and return interactions, with emotional expression, non-verbal vocalizations, and embodied expression develops in similar language and communication systems as verbal language. So if you imagine that verbal language starts with sounds, single letter sounds, then single words, then 2 and 3 words, and so on, that's all underpinned by symbolic representations. First, of letters to sound, and then words to their meaning. And so in the same way, infants' non-verbal language develops through associations between their own expression and adult responses. Early non-verbal language and communication includes, as you can see here, gaze, which is also linked to cognitive development. You know, the literature or the experimental research shows babies are paying attention and interested, and you know that by what they're looking at. So they measure infants' gaze. Intensity and types of cries are other embodied non-verbal communications. Smiling, touching, leaning, vocalizing. And so these early forms of communication are often referred to as cues, and adults are encouraged to look for, tune into, and respond to these signals to make sense of what a baby might be saying, doing, and how they're relating. And I missed a line there between adult returns because you do it by imitating. So when you give back what the baby's given to you, it's a form of active listening. And so these early turn-taking interactions are central to language and communication development. So when babies communicate in these ways, they're serving a language cue to us. And so FLIR and LINK say that we can return these cues, as I've just said, by imitating the expression and beginning early mutual conversations. So what? Among the outcomes of the project, as I presented last time, was seeing these early emotional capital practices as part of playful engagement with babies in intentional, sophisticated, and socio-dramatic ways, even though they're not given credit for that capacity yet. Many babies displayed or responded to the sophisticated, playful, pretend behaviours inherent in ECPs. So it follows they might be open to engaging in these when they are thoughtfully planned and included in early childhood education programs. Research about preschool-aged children considers play a neural exercise that enhances and promotes executive function, underpins cognitive flexibility, inhibition, and working memory. This early learning, this development, it all contributes to school-based learning outcomes. So by focusing on these capabilities through intentional play-based learning, opportunities prior to preschool can enhance early childhood education for all children to begin on developmental trajectories that not only optimize future outcomes, but create rich social infant and toddler cultures in the present. Implications for educators include that we can then plan for cognitive development and emotional literacy through pretend play with emotions. We can promote this awareness by starting with the everyday, natural and negotiated expressions that emotional capital practices represent. We do this by responding and initiating. We do this by pretending to laugh or cry. In doing so, early emotional understanding and communication is acknowledged and developed, and educators and infants can develop secure, respectful connections through intentional play-based learning. I haven't got time, but thank you. Start with the babies. We need to transform images of infant pedagogy as society's primary education. Within that, babies come first. If we see, value and resource them with the most sophisticated, most passionate, most creative and clever early childhood education professionals, we might come closer to fulfilling the infinite possibilities they represent and embody, which really should be what we are here for. I really enjoyed sharing this project with you, and I hope you enjoyed your own engagement and participation with it. If you'd like to be in touch about anything, I trust you've seen my email address at the bottom. Thank you very much. You can see all these links. If you'd like to follow up, this is a blog post, so you'd probably have to Google that because I just realised it is not in the reference list. So apologies for that. If you can't find that, by Googling that and putting my name in, you should find the blog post, how to pork it up with your baby. My baby was a pork chop is the first sentence. And so that kind of extends parts of what I have presented today. Thank you. Hopefully I will hear from you.